just as World War II was erupting. The November 1st, 1939 issue of the Watchtower featured an in-depth discussion of the topic of neutrality. That timing was absolutely perfect. Because of those articles, our brothers worldwide knew exactly what to do as the war engulfed the entire planet. Well, after the war, as the organization was rapidly growing, Jehovah's organization arranged large international conventions that were held in New York City. In 1958, 250,000 people, can you imagine, overflowed Yankee Stadium and the Polo Grounds. Were any of you there? Well, it's so wonderful. We still have a few people there. It's not that I wasn't in the truth at that time. It's just I wasn't in the world at that time. Well, that amazing convention came just on time. It energized God's people, and we could say it put Jehovah's Witnesses on the map. It was hard to ignore a convention of 250,000 people. Well, fast forward to 2020, and a time when the world was engulfed in a global pandemic. Large gatherings were prohibited in most countries. Could we go to Yankee Stadium and have 250,000 people? No. But right on time, Jehovah guided the faithful and discreet slave so that our worldwide brotherhood could enjoy the convention program from home. Truly, spiritual food at the proper time.
We're watching Mark Sanderson's introductory comments at the 2021 annual meeting, and wow, he is rewriting history here, folks. Such is his enthusiasm to prove the power and control and authority of the faithful slave. He's just making things up at this point. So he gives 3 examples from history of Jehovah supposedly maneuvering the leadership of the organization, the Jehovah's Witness organization, so that they make exactly the right decision at exactly the right time. I'm going to focus just on what he said about World War II and the pandemic, because I don't see how anything he said about Yankee Stadium speaks about timing. I mean, what was it specifically about 1958 that made it important for there to be 250,000 people at Yankee Stadium and in the surrounding area? Objectively, there's no relevance to that other than the largeness of the event. And if that's his sole argument, which it seems to be, it put us on the map. Well, does that mean that we can point to any religious event that's well attended and say that that's something that we should take notice of? God could be somehow involved in this event because, wow, look at how many thousands of people are attending. It's a self-evidently stupid argument. I'm going to ignore it, and I'm going to focus just on what Mark Sanderson says about World War II and the pandemic. Mark Sanderson talks about the fact that the November 1st, 1939 Watchtower was discussing neutrality. So neutrality, from a Jehovah's Witness perspective, involves not getting involved in Satan's system, in Satan's political system, staying out of it. It's not just about conscientious objection, which seems to be what he's alluding to here. It's also any kind of involvement, any kind of interest, you could say, in what's happening on the political stage worldwide. I would argue that actually, when you look throughout history, you can see that there have been examples of where the organization has gotten involved or has shown an interest in what Satan's political system is doing. And I will come to those examples. But let's just think about the specific claim here. November 1st, 1939. That was the date on the Watchtower article that Mark Sanderson is pointing to as evidence of timing that is, quote, absolutely perfect.
That timing was absolutely perfect.
Well, in order to judge how absolutely perfect the timing of this article was, we really need to know two things, don't we? We need to know when World War II erupted, and we need to know when the article was written. It's one thing for it to say November 1st on the front of the magazine, but when was it actually written? What did the writers know about what was going on in the world at that time? So World War II erupted September 1st. September 1st was when Germany invaded Poland. Now, September 1st is 2 months prior to the date of the Watchtower magazine in question, namely November 1st. Now, as it happens, Jehovah's Witnesses tend to receive their magazines months in advance of the date that is on the magazine. I can only assume that was also the case going back to the 1930s. So it's difficult to say, really, based purely on the date of the magazine, what the writers knew. But what we can do, of course, is actually look at the magazine, which is not something you can do easily when you're a Jehovah's Witness using only Jehovah's Witness resources, because they don't allow access to materials from the 1930s on jw.org. Here is the magazine in question, The Watchtower Announcing Jehovah's Kingdom, November 1st, 1939. You can see there the headline article is Neutrality. What do we see in paragraph 5? There is now war among some of the nations of earth. Some of the nations not actually at war have declared their neutrality. So there is now war among some of the nations of earth. We can confidently say the writers of this article, actually, I think we can say the writer was Joseph Rutherford. But let's, for argument's sake, say writers. We can say the writers of this article knew that the war had broken out, or the war had broken out at the point that this was being written. So when we're thinking about the timing being absolutely perfect, it seems that although they were responding relatively quickly, they were still behind the curve. Now, let's be clear. This article could have been written before Germany invaded Poland, before September 1st, 1939, and it still wouldn't be proof that God was steering the organization, because all you'd really need to do as a writer, if you're Joseph Rutherford, for example, is keep an eye on what's going on around the world, see that Germany is militarizing, see that there's trouble with Japan and Italy and what have you, and see that war is inevitable, or if there were to be a war, anticipate what the response would be. It still wouldn't be evidence, would it, of the organization being steered by God, even if the article had been written before the outbreak of war. But what we have when we look at the article itself, which again, the organization apparently is reticent for Jehovah's Witnesses to do, is we see that this was actually written after the outbreak of war. And then you have to ask, well, what's so absolutely perfect? Isn't this just a human organization responding to a global event? But let's think about neutrality more broadly and the stance that the organization has taken regarding neutrality over the years. I would point you to a video I've made on the United Nations and the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses were actually involved with the United Nations for 9 years as a non-governmental organization, an NGO. Check out that video if you haven't done so already. What does that say about the organization's track record on neutrality? And furthermore, allow me to read a few paragraphs from the June 1st, 1918 Watchtower, which coincidentally was the watchtower that announced the arrest of J.F. Rutherford. So Rutherford and his associates were arrested in 1918. They were later released in 1919, and all of this was subsequently given this great prophetic significance in the organization's theology. So quite an interesting Watchtower article for that reason. But allow me to read to you from where it says, May 30th for prayer and supplication. In accordance with the resolution of Congress of April 2nd, and with the proclamation of the President of the United States of May 11th, it is suggested that the Lord's people everywhere make May 30th a day of prayer and supplication. God was graciously pleased to cause this nation to be formed and to grow under the most favorable conditions in the world for the preservation of liberty, civil and religious. This is the land divinely shadowed with wings, overshadowed by the providential watch care of God's word, where God has lifted up an ensign on the mountain, kingdom, and where he has blown the trumpet message of the truth. Here the love of truth has for 300 years attracted from all quarters of the world people who love God, love the Bible, and love religious liberty. Here, practically alone of all the nations, exists in the fundamental laws of the land the safeguard that so long as the Constitution stands, no law may be made nor any governmental action taken prohibiting the exercise of religion or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Countless blessings have flowed to devout people through the wise provisions of the laws of the United States, blessings whose influences have been felt to the remotest corners of the earth, wherever even a spark of love for God-given freedom might be fanned into a glow. And I'm going to skip further to the end. Let there be praise and thanksgiving to God for the promised glorious outcome of the war, the breaking of the shackles of autocracy, the freeing of the captives, and the making of the world safe for the common people, blessings all assured by the word of God to the people of this country and of the whole world of mankind. Where's the neutrality there, Watchtower? Again, this is the magazine that announces that Rutherford and his associates have been arrested. A historic magazine. And here it is inducing all readers to participate in a day of prayer and supplication for a favorable outcome in the war for the United States, and waxing lyrical about the role of the United States in divine worship. So quite a remarkable article. And I feel it's important to draw your attention to it if you didn't know about it already. Mark Sanderson can talk about neutrality all he likes, but he must know about this article. He must know about it. And it's incredibly disingenuous for him to stand on the annual meeting platform and present this fake history where the organization's always been neutral and has always been right on time in telling God's people to be neutral. Well, the facts say otherwise. As to what he says about the pandemic,
could we go to Yankee Stadium and have 250,000 people? No. But right on time, Jehovah guided the faithful and discreet slave so that our worldwide brotherhood could enjoy the convention program from home. Truly, spiritual food at the proper time.
It was right on time that Jehovah guided the governing body to cancel the convention program, to arrange for it to be viewed at home in the Always Rejoice convention. Right on time. The problem is, Mark Sanderson is here rewriting very recent history. It's easier to rewrite history when it's further in the past. When he's making remarks about World War II, it's easy for people to just go along with it, because unless you're going to fact check, you're just going to go along with it, aren't you? And you're just going to think, well, yeah, good point. Yeah, God was really right on time there, and God was clearly guiding the organization. He's now talking about recent events. And the facts, again, don't line up with what he's saying. As we're going to see, on this annual meeting program, it was April 1st, 2020, when the conventions got cancelled. And I remember because I covered it on the channel. When was the pandemic announced? The World Health Organization announced the coronavirus pandemic on March 11th. 3 weeks. 3 weeks before the conventions got cancelled. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad they were cancelled. And I'm glad that none of them went ahead and later got cancelled. I'm glad it was done relatively early. But right on time, I mean, again, when you fact check, when you dig down on this, you find that the NBA suspended the remainder of the 2020 season on March 11th. I would say that's right on time. Does that mean the NBA are being guided by God? Does that make the NBA God's faithful and discreet slave? The Premier League also took action on March 11th when the pandemic was declared, deciding that all matches in England would be played without spectators. In fact, not just the Premier League, but other leagues as well, lower leagues. They had spectators cancelled for all remaining matches that season on March 11th. Does that make the Premier League or FA somehow divinely guided, somehow God's faithful slave, because they acted right away? I'm sorry, the facts just don't square up with what he's saying. What we're seeing, and again, it's great that they took the action that they took, but it wasn't fast. It was sort of average at best, how quickly they shut things down. What we're seeing is exactly what we would expect to see from a man-made organization, where there's a bit of indecision and where they don't really know what to do and they're waiting to see how things play out. That's what we're seeing. There's nothing extraordinary whatsoever, either in the example that's given about the pandemic or in the earlier example about World War II, much less that nonsense about 1958 Yankee Stadium Convention. Where is the evidence, Mark Sanderson, that any of these decisions or any of these events or any of these Watchtower magazines had divine guidance behind them?
And during the pandemic, we've had to change our methods, haven't we? We've had to receive direction about how to carry out our preaching work and how to carry out our congregation meetings. But throughout this period, we have received powerful, powerful evidence that Jehovah has given this direction to us at the proper time. Now, let me just give you a couple of examples. During the 2021 service year, at least 22 branches have reported an all-time peak in the number of publishers. Can you imagine? During the pandemic. For example, the Korea branch has reported a new peak in publishers every month during the 2021 service year. Isn't that amazing? During a pandemic. And with so many wonderful things happening in the field, I'm sure that you're all wondering about our worldwide memorial attendance for 2021. Well, by the undeserved kindness of our amazing God, Jehovah, we have reached an all-time peak, crossing the 21 million mark. Would you like to know the exact figure? Well, keep on the watch. It'll be announced today at the proper time. Well, today in our program, we are going to have a wonderful buffet of rich spiritual food of many varieties and types. And by the end of the program, I'm sure that you'll agree that it was just what we needed at this moment in time.
I think we'll reserve judgment for now, Mark Sanderson, if you don't mind, based on what we've seen already. Wow, he's really toying with the audience there, isn't he? Again, relishing this role as chairman of the 2021 annual meeting, teasing the figure for the memorial attendance, which apparently is all anyone can think about. I can actually think of a different figure I'd be more interested in, which is the percentage growth for 2021. And actually, I think the fact that he's not talking about that tells us a great deal. I think we can confidently say at this point, bear in mind this is October 2nd, 2021, a month after the 2021 service year ended. And bear in mind he's already giving us one of the figures from the 2021 grand totals. I think we can confidently say that they haven't had growth again. Because let's remember, the figures for 2020 were not good in terms of the actual growth of the organization. You can talk about memorial attendance all you like. You know, you can talk about branches having peak numbers. And by the way, 22 branches reporting an all-time peak. There are 87 branches. If you're going to say that 22 out of 87 had an all-time peak, shouldn't you also be telling us which of those 87 branches went into decline? Are you not blatantly cherry-picking when you do things this way? But yeah, the 2020 figures, it was a 0.6% decrease, the first of its kind in 42 years, as I mentioned repeatedly on this channel. This is an organization in decline, or was as of a year ago, and I think we're in for another one. Because if they had had an increase, despite it being a pandemic, and you'll notice the enthusiasm with which he cited the fact that these figures were in a pandemic.
During the 2021 service year, at least 22 branches have reported an all-time peak in the number of publishers. Can you imagine? During the pandemic.
So clearly he's excited about these figures in the context of the pandemic. He's essentially saying, our organization is being supported and guided and backed by God because look at what we've achieved despite there being a pandemic. And the two figures he's going for are the ones no one is really bothered about. In other words, the number of branches with all-time peaks and the memorial attendance. The memorial attendance is frankly irrelevant. We're talking about an event that many people attend just to keep their family happy. And I can imagine if I were a PIMO JW, I would quite frankly bite the bullet. I would sit through that event just to keep my family off my back. I could imagine being in that mindset. This is an organization where people will feel coerced, will have felt coerced to go to that event, especially considering the fact that you didn't have to go in person. All you needed to do is log on to a Zoom call. So of course they were going to get a record attendance. I can't see how anyone was genuinely waiting with bated breath for that particular figure to be read out. The figure we want to know, the figure we're all waiting for, is the average publisher's figure. Because for 2019, it was 8,471,008. For 2020, it fell to 8,424,185, a drop of 46,823 Jehovah's Witnesses. And the fact that he isn't giving us the figure this time, on October 2nd, 2021, tells me that we're in for another decline. Because if it had been a favourable number, you can bet he would have led with that.